one question people often ask is, how did I ever come up with the idea to use spools of thread? And it really came from a couple of sources. One was in the mid-90s, there were these things called slide files in New York City where artists would have like a folder with 20, 35 millimeter slides. You'd have your resume and an artist statement, and curators could go through those file cabinets and look at different artists' work and select works for exhibitions. And those went digital, and they went digital well before we were all sending each other JPEGs, and well before you even had software that came on CDs. So when we transferred these things to photo CDs, it was very mysterious and shocking. And I mean, do you remember the first time somebody sent you a JPEG? How shocking it was, and often what you saw was like a baby, right? And they didn't understand that you need to send it at a certain scale, so what you saw was here's the mouth, and then you'd scroll down and you'd see here's the eye. I mean, we all did that. So this is before then is when we were forced as artists to go digital. And so I took my slides to a photo lab and brought home a photo CD, popped into the computer, and saw one of my sculptures, pre any of this, on my monitor. And it blew me away to think about a sculpture that was filled with material and mass and realness being presented through the digital realm, which is really nothing. There's nothing physical about a pixel. And so that was probably the first shock that I had that led to the eventual question, how does a sculptor deal with digital nothingness? The other component was Chuck Close had a retrospective at MoMA, mid to late, probably mid-90s also. And although his work is not inspired by digital technology, his grids were inspired by the degradation of printing blocks, but they reminded me of pixels, and I remember leaving there thinking, again, how can I represent the pixel in a sculptural way? So it was a combination of those two things that got me started compiling a list of things that reminded me of pixels. And I had a lot of criteria for them, besides that they had to remind me of pixels, that they had to be interesting objects in and of themselves. And they had to be readily available and come in a decent range of colors. So thread spools, for obvious reasons, rose to the top of the list. They come in 302 colors. Coates & Clark still manufactured all 302 colors, and they were there for the purchasing. So that's the original idea. How I came to use optical devices is the first thread spool piece I did, I wasn't sure if it was going to work. I mean, I thought the way these pieces were going to function was a lot like a Chuck Close self-portrait, that you'd see it from a distance, you'd see the image, and as you gradually walked up to it, the image would dissipate and you'd focus on these thread spools. But my studio was so small, my whole studio was from here to there, and maybe from here to there, but squared off. So I was out in the hall, squinting, going, is this working, is this working? And there happened to be some binoculars in the studio. So I flipped them around, and literally yelled, wow! And I thought, oh my God, what does this mean? What does this mean? And wow is an interesting word that you'll hear a lot of in here. And I have an idea of why that word pops out of people's mouths, but we'll get to that in a second. And so it jolted me into thinking, well, what does this mean? And eventually the answer was it's showing how reality, as we think of reality, is scale dependent. That here I was seeing two realities based on subtle shifts in scale. And it's a pretty profound thing if you think about it, that our human perception, how limited it is, that we're all standing here and what we think of as this is reality. And yet there are overlapping realities that are beyond the human perception that are existing all the way up to the macrocosms and all the way down to the microcosms that are here now right with us, and we're not experiencing them. So these thread spool pieces are actually showing how limited human perception is, that in this reality we're focusing, our brains and eyes are focusing on spools of thread, and yet look at the same thing, you can still see the spools of thread, and yet your reality shifts, and you're focusing more on the image. So it's really a pretty profound thing that it's demonstrating that reality isn't what we think. It's not this static thing, it is our perception that we're existing in. So far no questions, but I'm hard to break in on, but just jump in anyway. How I came to use art historical reference as subject matter is in 2004 I was invited by the Brooklyn Museum to represent the United States at the 2005 Ljubljana Print Biennale. And it was an interesting choice for me to be the selected artist because I'm not a printmaker. But what the curator, Marilyn Kushner, thought is that I really am doing something, I'm mechanically reproducing something, so in her mind it kind of was like a print in that it's a mechanical reproduction. And I focused on that aspect of printmaking in my concept for that show. And what I was really interested in is really demonstrating how mechanical reproductions, and that's, that we look at pictures in magazines, we look at, in art books, now we're looking at images of art on the internet, that how it alters really the reality of that image as it exists, that our mind's eye has a false image of something. So one of the things that's lost in mechanical reproductions is scale, right? I mean, how many of you, like me, thought The Last Supper was about like that? Because that's what we keep seeing. We see posters of it, and you can't possibly imagine that it's 29 feet wide. So for me, I thought, well, that's an interesting thing to bring back, that this is a life-scale, crop, top and bottom, but a life-scale interpretation of The Last Supper. So it lets people know something about the original they didn't know. The reason it's this open-ended trapezoid shape is it's accentuating the illusion of the three-dimensional space that the original mural has. That if you stand in the rectory where the real Last Supper is, and you stand in a particular location, the perspective lines of the building continue right into the mural and end all at a single point at the Christ figure's right eye. So that's something, again, lost in mechanical reproduction. I'm sure it was really, really interesting for Da Vinci to do, or else he would have done it. The other reasons I did this particular painting is it's well known. If you didn't know it, it wouldn't be as interesting to discover it. So please step in and look at this while I'm talking, though. That what you're seeing here also is your brain in action, how it's filling in missing information. So if you look at the Christ figure's face directly, there's really no face there. But look at it in the sphere, and you can actually almost make out the expression on the face, not just features. So do definitely step in. I mean, while we're here. So
I want you to know that my husband's a scientist, and this is he just came from the ophthalmologist conference in San Francisco. What he does is work on implanting nanotechnology into the people who lost their macular degeneration, and they are implanting. So, and we're seeing what they can see, which is, of course, not what we can see.
Yeah.
But the eye is good, but the nerve is not. So
right.
So I wonder if you have visited with the ophthalmologist.
Yes.
I would be very
actually,
keen on seeing this.
I've done a lot of lectures, interdisciplinary lectures, like at the New York Academy of Sciences, with top neurologists like Margaret Livingstone, V.S. Ramachandran. It's quite extraordinary how we're all intersecting. That I'm basically offering examples of what they're learning in the labs, and it's a lot of well, it's certainly quite an honor to be sitting on a panel with these people, and to have them be excited about that this is what they're learning about. So you're looking at probably one of the more interesting things. See the old man in front of the column?
No.
You don't see him there?
I do see him here.
Okay, so and this is probably the most baffling thing, maybe second most baffling thing, or first in the show. There's an old man right there. So it's showing how our brains are filling in information, that what's out there, that we all think what we're seeing out there is actually out there. But what's out there is this raw data, enters the brain assembles an image, projects it back out, and makes it possible for us to interact with each other, to interact with the floor, the viewing sphere, and stuff like that. And one key, this is mind-blowing to me, I hope it is to at least one of you, that there are 10 times as many nerve fibers running from the brain to the eye as there are from the eye to the brain. And that's pretty mind-blowing. It means the brain is taking information and adding information and assembling it and then projecting it back out. It's showing that what we think is out there, well, I guess you could say it either way, that what's out there is exactly what we think is out there, or it's not what we think is out there. We're saying the same thing either way. It's in here. It's like we're creating a holographic image so that we can interact with each other in the world. So again, okay, this is a life-size interpretation constructed from over 20,000 spools. And the wow word comes out of the most sophisticated mouth. It comes out of different languages. It's really interesting. In Paris at my show there, people still say wow. And I'm convinced, though, that when you're surprised, your temporal lobe lights up. And somehow attached to that mechanism is the word wow. So if you hear people say wow, that's why. And you're going to have some people who go, oh, I can see what that is, because once they've started learning that things are upside down, blah, 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 they'll start feeling quite, cocky about the whole experience. But what you can tell them about that is now their brain has been primed, neurologically primed, to recognize something new they hadn't yet been exposed to prior. So the fact that you now all went, oh my gosh, the threadful pieces are all upside down, you immediately shifted your looking at it. So you're already priming your brain to try to make sense of it, to try to guess the puzzle, which is great. I think it keeps people engaged versus boringly walking through, staring blankly at paintings.
Are your viewing things just plain glass?
They're acrylic. You get a better quality in their solid acrylic. And incidentally, this functions just like the human eye. It's inverting imagery. So this world that we're living in is actually upside down. Our brain corrects that instantaneously. If you were to put on glasses that invert it again, within a certain number of days, scientists have done this, they put the goggles on that inverts it, that within a certain number of days your brain makes that adjustment. And then you can interact again with the world. So first I'm sure you're going like this when you're trying to reach your shoe, but eventually you start reaching to the new shoe, which is now up there. So, yeah.
I put those goggles on when I was a kid.
Pardon?
I actually put one of those goggles on.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and it was weird.
Yeah.
Luckily I could leave it on.
Yeah, it's like trying to do something in a mirror. Some stuff we're good at, like brushing our teeth. Other more complicated things is harder. Yeah. So, moving on, another life-size interpretation of a painting that exists in a different scale in most people's mind's eye. To me, the Mona Lisa, even though I knew the scale before I saw her, I feel like it should be about like that. And everybody I talk to feels the same thing. It's a weird phenomenon that we all share, right? And when you finally see it, it's like, wow, it's so small. And again, in particular, like that old man in front of the column, that you can make out facial features on the Mona Lisa, when in fact this is the only reference at all to the face. So again, it's showing how we fill in information, and we think it's out there, but in fact it isn't. It's just in here. It is kind of magic. I mean, it's mind-boggling it's almost impossible to grasp that what's out there isn't out there. We're so convinced that it is. Something's out there. And I guess if you close your eyes and, I don't know, I'm not sure how you do it, to try to get a sense of what really is out there. But every now and then, don't you have that feeling like you get a weird vibe and you're thinking maybe you just tapped into another realm, who knows? Or maybe you just drink too much coffee.
Or seeing too many Star Trek.
Seeing too many Star Treks, yeah, that's the other thing. So, oftentimes when I'm researching a piece, like I researched last summer, I learned something about it that I think is interesting that is not widely known. And I mentioned it earlier that the Christ figure's right eye is the single vanishing point for all the architectural elements in the Last Supper and even within the site itself. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And then through Googling, right, one thing leads you to another, I stumbled upon a survey by a scientist, Christopher Tyler at USC. And he noticed something that I had never noticed and nobody probably had ever noticed. And I'm shocked that we didn't once he pointed it out. That if you look at a lot of three-quarter view portraits, that's like not straight, not sideways, that one of the two eyes tends to be centered left to right in the format of the painting composition. And so he then went and researched to try to see if artists were told to do this. And he tried to find reference in art criticism, and he only found one reference to somebody noticing that artists did it. So then he thought, well, he's a neuroscientist. He thought, well, maybe artists are doing something intuitively that's saying something about the brain. And he thought perhaps it had something to do with symmetry, because by putting one eye in the center, you're creating a type of symmetry in something very asymmetrical, that being the three-quarter view portrait. So he basically threw a bunch of students in functional MRI scanners, watched the brain in action, showed them symmetrical images, showed them asymmetrical images, and noticed that the brain instantaneously recognized symmetry. So indicating that there's a hardwiring for symmetry. And it does make sense that we would have that, considering it's advantageous if you're living in the woods that you would see something symmetrical like the two eyes of a lion in this foliage of asymmetry. And an interesting fact about symmetry that is not true in my face is very symmetrical faces are considered the most beautiful. That models have faces, very symmetrical faces. I think people have done surveys of the most beautiful faces in Hollywood, very symmetrical. I'm sure Nicole Kidman is so symmetrical, which is why I probably don't like her face. But she doesn't have real, she looks like, she's got two mirrors, like, perfect face. But anyway, so once I thought, well, that's interesting, artists are doing that, I started looking at portrait galleries totally differently. Then I'd walk in there and instantly it was like boom, 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 wherever you'd see it, it was clearly there. And when it wasn't there, the portrait felt a little awkward to me. So I thought, well, okay, let me go with that as a jumping off point to do a series of work. So it led to these works that I call the eye-centered portraits. And I selected a range of styles from different eras, and I tried to select works that were recognizable to many people, and that were kind of interesting compositionally. So Vermeer's Girl with the Pearl Earring is one of them. And something that I'd be curious if anybody notices is that the image that you're seeing directly in the thread is not flat. And you can see it more clearly with Van Eyck. See how his face is all distorted? So what I've done on the computer is it's like I've projected them inside a concave bowl. And what that does is it neutralizes the convex sphere, and you end up with a flat image in the sphere. So you're not seeing a distortion. And the way you'll notice how much it's different is if you look at this image and then look at the Mona Lisa here, that intentionally I did not negative spherize it. You'll see how bulbous she looks and how flat this looks. So just it'd be curious if anybody notices that. Like, why doesn't this look round? They probably won't notice, but it's just something that I'd be curious if anybody ever does figure out. So there's a Girl with a Pearl Earring. This piece, back to this crystal work, this is another example of an eye-centered portrait, but a different end result. So what I've done here is I've divided along that vertical axis, which is very close to that centered eye, and I've mirrored both sides to create two new symmetrical images. These are much more abstract versus this is quite literal, these other thread school works. But if you were to kind of cover this point and that point, you'd end up having Lady with an Ermine by Da Vinci. And in the handout that people can take, they'll see the original portraits that will help them. They'll be primed, they're neurologically primed to be able to see the relationship between this and the actual painting. And again, this is a life-size recreation, so that is the size of the piece. That with crystals that come in different sizes, so I can easily shift scales to make it the size I want.
So Deborah, it's safe to say we got all these works here that are the same size as the original masterpieces, but over there you've got a change in scale.
Yeah. Oh, did you do that intentionally?
Well, we still thought about it.
That was rather smart. That's easier to remember. Yeah. So yeah. So and this one is shockingly small too. For those who know this painting by Van Eyck, Man with a Red Turban, I was shocked that it's 7 inches by 10 inches, right? Yeah. But a lot of like, and it's thought that Van Eyck and others used optical devices, and early on it was easier to make small paintings with optical devices. So maybe that's why it's so small. But again, eye-centered, you can kind of see it right there. And then dividing it and creating these two new images that one, I just love that it looked like a rose. I just thought it was so interesting and beautiful. So right behind you, you're going to see the real distorted, enlarged rendering of the Mona Lisa's face. And the concept for this piece came out of, again, stumbling upon interesting facts in books. In this case, it was Margaret Livingstone's The Art, Vision and Art, the Biology of Seeing. She's a neurophysiologist at Harvard that's been very inspirational to my work. And what she studied is why the Mona Lisa smile is so elusive. And what she found is that it's best seen with what are called low spatial frequencies of peripheral vision. In other words, it's best seen if you don't look straight at it. That the smile itself is very blurry or low resolution, the way Da Vinci painted it. And so those low spatial frequencies key into that low resolution. So the smile appears when you look away, you look at it, it disappears with your central crisp vision. So what I did was I used the distortion of the sphere itself to create an exaggerated smile. And you don't need to know anything about what I just said, but I think people appreciate the humor in seeing the Mona Lisa smirking.
Yeah.
So then they can get into, you know, that anybody who's ever seen the Mona Lisa and really study, you can, you know, have the whole thought of, you know, what is it with the smile and blah, blah, blah.
Just curious about why you cropped this one the way you did, given the way you got these other two a little more centered.
That's a good question. Why, I mean, these were they the first circular pieces? No, I did a circular work before this. You know, I don't think it was a conscious decision. I think I just did it.
The eye's not in the middle here. I mean, the eyes.
Yeah, it was lower. I mean, I did remember making that decision not to do it, even though you know, in many cases I go with that. But here I was working on the smile, so I wanted the smile to be at a certain point in the sphere, so it would, you know, be distorted. And then I love the red in this piece. And something that's true in all of these pieces, that you know, basically what I'm doing on the computer is I'm breaking down images into a certain number of pixels. So this is 80 pixels high by 80 pixels across. And then I translate pixels into thread spool colors or into Swarovski crystal colors. But it's not such like an automatic thing that if, let's say, this were to break apart and it would be a big blotch of red here and a big blotch of black there, that I don't think would be beautiful to look at in its abstraction. And the way this looks in its abstraction without the viewing sphere is as important to me as the trick in the sphere. That if you never saw the sphere, I would hope that this would be an interesting object to look at in and of itself. And it doesn't happen automatically. In the computer, you can push all sorts of colors in. And if you look back to the Last Supper, you can see how easily the computer could have gone just brown, right, in those background colors. And yet I put in all sorts of greens and blues and purples to make it more vibrant and interesting to look at in its abstraction. And you end up getting like real subtle details there. So the same is true for here. I didn't allow it to do big blotches of red. And again, you're seeing a non-distorted face. You're not seeing it rounded like the Mona Lisa. I mean, not that you maybe even want to bring that up with people. You know, I don't know if it's interesting, but I find it interesting that people don't, you know, wonder, you know. Because it's hard to take in everything.
I think it's interesting with the background colors because when we're teaching colored pencils to children, we take away their browns and their blacks and their grays and make them make those colors.
Yeah.
So they are getting to use those other colors. So that's what that appears to me.
It's exactly the same thing. Yeah, that you're blending, you're doing color theory in action. Yeah.
I have a question about how exactly do you match the colors, for instance, from your monitor and the pixels and all, to match them with the exact color of the thread that you know, do you do that just intuitively?
At first I did it manually. I actually had every thread spool color sitting on a table next to me, and I blew up the pixels, and I looked at each of the 5,760 pixels and assigned a thread color. And then I thought, well, what if my values are off? What if the light, you know, the white to dark, that's off? So then I did a black and white version on the computer and squinted and looked at all my thread spools and thought, you know, I think I'm pretty close. So I went ahead and made the first piece. It did work. I mean, it has a more cartoony feel. But now what I have is a custom software program that I enter in specific RGB numbers for each thread spool. And basically each pixel you're seeing on your monitor is a combination of red, green, blue, RGB. And you can enter in, it's like from 0 to, I forgot the top number, that it's a very specific thing you're telling the computer to give you back. So I limit the computer's ability to give me combinations of those 3 colors to whatever palette I'm working with. So that part is now automated, which saves me like months. I mean, I probably would have done 2 thread spool pieces by now had I not gotten the custom software program. Maybe 4.
Yeah. How long does it take you to do one of these?
To assemble a piece like this, if I'm working full-time assembling, I can assemble it in a week. To get to the point where I assemble would be, I would say, if I'm only working on that, it would take 2 full weeks to, you know, get ready to assemble. So it's, I mean, there are a lot of decisions that go into even like selecting how do you end up with male with red turban when I had looked at say, 200 portraits that also had interesting qualities. So first is the narrowing down of, and the justification of why this piece versus all the others I'm considering. And then deciding, do I want it to be 8 feet tall? Do I want it to be 7 feet tall? What happens as I reduce resolution if it were 6 feet tall? What am I losing in the sphere? What am I gaining here? How does it break apart? I mean, there's all these crazy decisions that can only be made over time. And you have to keep having fresh eyes, fresh brain. So I would say a minimum of 2 weeks really thinking about a piece to avoid making, you know, errors or something that I wish I hadn't done. But the assembly is the fun part. It is so gratifying at the end of the day to look at the wall and to say, I did that today. You know, versus our lives are spent, like some days at the end of the day you feel so frustrated. It's like you were busy, and what exactly do you have to show for it? You know, what the pile on your desk looks different. I mean, a little bit different, or there's more stuff on it. So it's just a deeply satisfying thing to just go into the studio and declare I'm doing, you know, this many rows, and to do those rows and to leave. It's a great, great day.
So you work in sections, rows?
Yeah, everything is kind of mapped out like a giant bingo game. You know, you just, like, every color, you know, has, like, there's numbers on a map, and there's numbers on each spool, and you just start popping them down. Yeah, it's very satisfying.
I have a question about how many individual colors are actually involved in a piece like this. It doesn't seem like there are more than maybe 20 or 30, yet when you look through the viewing sphere, it seems like there are just countless gradations.
Yeah, there are probably, like, at least 80 colors in
Really?
here. There are wacky variations, subtle variations that you wouldn't even be able to see there were different colors unless you had them side by side. But I do think it makes a difference in the sphere when it's all said and done. But something the computer does that the human eye can't do, it does that you can ask it to dither. And what it does is it looks at like these nine pixels, and then looks at these 9 and these 9 and these 9 and these 9, and adjusts all of them to create the illusion of more color. So the reason this looks like a full-color JPEG is that through that dithering, there may be 80 colors there, but it's giving the illusion of maybe 5,000 by its subtle adjustments of each pixel around each pixel to create that illusion. So it's pretty profound how the computer does that. So the work is basically, it can only be done now, you know, in time. And I think it's saying something about how artists, you know, we live in the era we live in, and our work is connected to it. So digital technology is part of the era that I live in, and it's not surprising that I'm using it, just like Da Vinci, you know, he created the technologies of his era often, but how, you know, the artists in that era, like for instance the Proto-Renaissance, when they were learning about 1- and 2-point perspective. If you've ever seen an exhibition on the Proto-Renaissance, and you know basic perspective, which we all learned in grade school, watch them struggle with it, because they didn't have the technology yet. And then once that somebody goes, oh look, if you do it this way, the foreground looks right, the people are standing, you know, they're the right scale, and the chair looks like it's sitting on the floor versus floating. And then all of a sudden, boom, everybody's doing it in the Renaissance. But the Proto-Renaissance is more interesting to watch before they have the technology. And, you know, watching different artists struggle with it, get it right here and lose it there. So, yeah. This work, you're going to have to take my word for it. This is going to have a stainless steel cylinder in the center. And what this will be is a perfect, in-the-round recreation of Holbein's The Ambassadors. So it's a type of anamorphic perspective, and incidentally, going back to Da Vinci, he's attributed, anamorphic perspective is attributed to Da Vinci. And you could do this mathematically, and like they have, if you Googled, you know, how to make an anamorphic image, they would give you the lesson plan, and you could take a grid and turn it into a circle like this in a very simple way. But you can do it that way, or you can use Photoshop and do it instantaneously. So I, of course, chose Photoshop to do it instantaneously. But it's kind of interesting that it links all the way back to Da Vinci, who, you know, so that it ties all the works together in a way. What else do I have to say about it? Chenille stems, otherwise known as pipe cleaners, lowly materials. You know, I think that by using them in the way that I do, they have a dignity that we don't normally associate with them. Some artists use lowly materials and they want their work to be kitsch. They want it to be childlike, childish, I'd say. In this case, that's not my goal, and I hope that's not the result, because to me this looks quite dignified. So, and this piece will be, you know, popular with people. They'll be, you know, baffled at it. They don't even have to recognize the painting. But this work and this work are connected, that what that painting's known for is the elongated skull in the foreground.
How do you attach them? How do you attach, yeah.
They're actually, they're like a U, each one's bent in a U and they're stuck through a netting, and then the netting is attached to this base. And it will be a circle when it's all said and done.
How would you easily define anamorphic?
Anamorphic, yeah, is like a distortion. So you're distorting something that's then corrected either in a mirror or when standing in a certain location, or in this case, in the cylinder. So it's a mathematical distortion. And this one is a really good example that you see how elongated, you can kind of see that skull, right? If you look at it, because you're looking for this long skull. But if you look at the reflection of the mirror, you can see the corrected skull. So it's, with the original Holbein painting, you have to stand almost next to it to see the skull. And it's hard to see, not everybody can see it in the original, so I'm hoping this makes it a little bit easier to see. And so the series behind you, they're based on a work by Salvador Dali, and the best place to look at the original work is to the right, the large work to the right, that you see there's a nude woman looking through a portal. But you could also squint and see that's Abraham Lincoln's face at the same time. You see that? Mm-hmm. And then if you look near her calves, you see a tiny little square of Abraham Lincoln's face again. So that's Dali's interpretation of one of the earliest pixelated images made in 1973 by a Bell Lab scientist, Leon Harmon. So this is why the piece is titled After Dali, After Harmon. And Dali was very inspired by technology. So again, an artist lived in the era, being inspired by the world in which he lived. So what basically what I've done, image to the left of the large one, is I've kind of combined the original pixelated image with the Dali image, creating a more pixelated version. And if there's a mirror against this wall, you'd be able to show people something about neurological priming. You might be able to come way back here and look at it. The mirror will be helpful though. So look at the woman standing in front of the portal and really like get that image burned into your eyes. Really see it. And then it'll help to squint. Quickly look to the image on the left and see if you can't make out just a hint of her figure. You see it? A little bit? It'll be more obvious if you do it with a mirror. If you've got a mirror in here. That's neurological priming. Your brain is looking to see something and then it projects it onto that pixelated image. So it's another example of how our brains are creating imagery. And the 8 works there are another type of neurologic priming. And these, of course, only make sense in the context of the whole. And your brain likes shifts back and forth. What is the relationship between these things? It's like a puzzle, and you start seeing, oh, the scale is shifting, the cropping is shifting, but I see that that's the one. You make sense of that, and you see the relationship between the other one. Again, these are less literal than the grad school works. It's just different, representations of images and neurologic processes and stuff like that. So there it was, backwards.
Yeah, backwards. Did you work backwards? Did you start with painting?
No, I actually started as a stone carver. And that gave me my love of long processes. And what was interesting is I did it for 10 years. And if you want to have all your life's issues come up, try stone carving. Because each time a piece comes up, it's gone. So any issues you have about making mistakes or failure, they come up. And you can't blame it on anybody except for yourself. So I watched my brain function. I watched my emotions rise and fall for 10 years. And I became probably more aware of what I do when I'm frightened, what I do when I'm frustrated, than, it's like my own little psychotherapy, self-induced psychotherapy. The attachment thing, the more I liked the piece, the more fearful I would get the closer I came to the end, because what if the nose came off? And it was just, you just watched yourself go ding, ding, ding. You watch yourself go, I think I'm hungry. It's like, no, I'm not hungry, I'm avoiding. Should I eat anyway? Sure. It's like, I really should clean up that drawer over there. I'm avoiding. Should I do it? Yes. It was just like this whole process of watching my brain try to avoid negative emotions. And so it was as a result of that. But one other link to the current work is I was fascinated by Michelangelo, and what I wanted to do was to be able to create an image, a Michelangelo-style image, as it existed in my mind's eye in stone. And the piece that I did that with marked the end of stone carving. When I finally went, that's it. I reached the goal and I was done. And it was like the Forrest Gump thing, he's running, all of a sudden he's done. It was that dramatic. People were like, you're done? You know, you just kept going. And it was literally the end. I hit my goal and moved on. Yeah. So it is kind of interesting, you know, I started off with this Renaissance thing, and then still it keeps kind of circling back around in different ways. Yeah.
Where do you think the next thing will be?
The wave? You know, the imagery is going more pop. The thread spools have recently changed into what look like much more pop objects. They lack the dignity of these thread spools. So I've been doing more like kind of iconic rock stars, pop imagery, Marilyn Monroe's. But I've become completely obsessed with positive reinforcement training in the realm of dogs. And just last night, I was talking to Chris about this, that I'm beginning to see how it's going to integrate back into my art. Somehow, something about how we respond, you know, to positive reinforcement, to integrating that into an experience, because it's a brain thing. You know, our brains are you know, happy when we get positive reinforcement for something. Something says, you know, you look nice, or you know, whatever. I mean, that's positive reinforcement. We may wear the scarf again. You know, that kind of thing. Thank you. You'll see later. So somehow, I mean, just like when first I was doing these works, then I learned that they have an aspect that's very scientific. You know, that's about how the brain functions. Then that informs my work, and I get more specific about these brain processes. So I have a feeling it's beginning to you know, work its way into my consciousness. How I might integrate something that's completely got me by, like, I can't stand it, I love it so much, this dog training thing, that somehow it's going to come back into my work in a way that viewers can appreciate this aspect of what it is to be, you know, a human being, a mammal, whatever, you know. And I hope that they'll, you know, have happy feelings, like I have happy feelings when I'm positively reinforced, so, yeah. But who knows what it's going to look like, you know, that's the fun part about being an artist. If you get tired of what you're doing, you can change what you're doing, and yet you haven't changed careers. So you don't appear flaky, even though in your mind you really are changing, you know, careers, you know, whenever you get sick of what you're doing. So, yeah.
What is your favorite piece?
You know, favorite, you know, there are things I like about each piece. I mean, I don't get to see The Last Supper much because it's so big, I don't install it in my studio ever. I mean, I love the colors in that, the Van Eycks, the crystal works I think are, like, I'm sure there's something about sparkly things that our brain loves, even though our taste says we don't like sparkly things, but I think I do. Right? Like, we don't want to like them, but we like them.
That's why that came out.
They make you feel good. No, they make you feel good.
They make you feel good, right?
They make you happy.
So next time you see me, I'm going to be wearing like a not in this
with your dog.
If I do, tell me that sounds bad.
When you said about eye-centered perspective for the portrait,
Yes.
is that true for Chuck Close, for all of them?
His 3/4 often, yeah. And it's true for this one. This is an eye-centered portrait. Once you know that, going to a portrait gallery will forever be different. And something I've noticed about it, when that eye is centered, your eye, you know, travels around the painting, but you land on it like you're talking to a person. We don't go back, forth, back, forth. When it's not centered, watch where your eyes go, bum, 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 bum. It creates more of an intimacy like you would have with a person having a conversation than focused on one eye. I think that's pretty amazing. Yeah. So, you know, I mean, I love the, you know, the swirly thing here. I mean, there's aspects of each one that, you know, I love these orange ones, like an orange Volkswagen bus from the 70s that, you know, I love that color, it's a happy color. Gosh, that's hard to say, because each one was such a long process to get to. And the one thing that I don't, you know, if I were to have amnesia, I could tell you better which is my favorite piece. The problem that I've had, and I didn't realize it right away, is that since I already know what I'm looking for, I never get the wow anymore. I only had the wow the first time when I looked through the binoculars because I hadn't anticipated what I'd see. Now I do so much research that by the time I make the piece, it's actually just deja vu. You know, I feel like my husband even gets it. You know, I'll do a piece and he'll go, are you sure somebody else didn't do this? It's like, no, because you just saw them on the computer for like 20 minutes. It feels so familiar that you don't actually get to have the wow experience. So I have to base the success of the piece on other people and see what their experience is to judge whether it's successful or not.
So Barbara, when I look at this one, I keep thinking that the right-hand side, which relate more to Dolly, it's like I'm zooming in without losing resolution. Over here on the Harmon side, it's like you're looking at a really low-res JPEG and zooming in and getting down to the actual basic blocks of it.
Yeah.
So it feels like two different exercises in zooming and panning out.
Yeah, and it's all mechanically. There's never a shift. I mean, it's all the same mechanical, like this much up in scale, this much, change in resolution. I mean, looking at it here, the thought I've never had that I now have in the one on the far left is that feels to be like the noise of raw data. That might be all that's out there, out here. And that we're taking something as vague as that and creating that, or us. So that, I've never had that thought before. But it's what I suspect is really out there. Something very basic.
Talk about basic. I can't help but think back to years when I was growing up and my eyesight started to change and how I would play with my, switch and all that. And all the children we bring in here and how they'll be at stages when their eyesight is changing too. Those of you who have perfect vision, you're not so lucky.
Yeah, you haven't gone through it.
But it's just, there'll be distortions upon distortions.